Okay, so now we've got Lisa from Community Social Housing Update Report.
That's a bit rinse and repeat, got some of the same sort of slides, so don't go too far away, Kate. You might be in the hot seat over here as well. Oh, you right? Oh,
yeah, you're welcome to stay, Philip.
Oh, yeah. I'll go down there. No, you can sit there. So yeah, so probably some very similar. You've got the report. So Lisa, Community Housing Liaison Lead, Christchurch City Council. Similar slides. Some of the numbers will probably go numbers of bedrooms and units will look a little bit different. That's because we also, as council, have some units that we lease to others outside of OCHT. So that's why some of those numbers will look a little bit different to what OCHT had. And we also, like OCHT have, we've been previously asked by councillors to report not only on units but on the number of beds. So currently, through the council portfolio, which is leased to OCHT and to other providers that we have, and when I talk other providers, we've got the likes of the YWCA, and we have Lancewood, which is Beckenham Housing Trust, and other operators. So we have 2,489 units which are owned and operated through here. It exceeds our level of service targets, so we're pleased about that. As OCHT mentioned in their presentation, we now have exceeded the number of units post-earthquake, and that happened when Willard Street was opened. So that's we're really pleased with that result. Currently 97.1% on IRR, and we had council had set a target of 50%, and that was met. During
clarify that 57,
50,
not 97.
50, oh, so I said 97, 57.1, sorry. And that was met in June 23. So some really, really good progress, as we've already heard, that OCHT are definitely making in that space. We won't talk to the 9 years on slide because Kate has already covered that. And also with the number of bedrooms and what have you, the number of, you can read there what Kāinga are offering, what we're offering, what community housing providers are offering. So there is quite a few bedrooms in Christchurch and quite a few units, but as we know, still not enough. The housing fund, as we know, and as we often talk about, this is rates neutral, so it is no rates funding that comes into that. So we are reliant on what OCHT get in with the rents and so forth there. You will see that, our starting and balance at the 1st of July was just over 3 million, and we're 3.9 at the end of June, and this is thanks to what OCHT are doing in that space. It is less than what we had forecast because we haven't had the asset sales that we had predicted, and this is a little bit due to the change in government funding policy. So that hasn't happened as quickly as we would have liked. But as we have talked about, Andrews Crescent was probably the key one in that, but it is still definitely on the cards, and one that is we're looking at getting through, whether that be for sale or for lease or whatever. So there's lots of talk with lots of providers in that space because it is a big piece of land. The fund itself actually operates on a negative balance for most of the year, and then with extra income that we get from OCHT that comes in, that pushes that back into the positive. It's not always a good story. We do have damage. This year, unfortunately, we have had 2 fire damaged properties, and they have been extensively damaged. We have quite a high insurance deductible, so that really does put a hit on the fund when we have to do that. We have looked at other mechanisms with that, whether we look at self-insuring, for example, or just looking at different ways of how we do that. And at this stage, the risk is too high for us to do that. So we're sticking with the status quo, but it is something that we are constantly always looking at in ways that we can look at that. We also look at when we get a unit that's extensively damaged is on the positive, it gives us a really good opportunity to make that a little bit more fit for purpose. Under insurance, we can make a studio into a one bedroom. We can make an open plan kitchen, living, dining, which we don't have in some of our older stock. So that's a plus side on that. But we do look at is it worth redoing the repairs and that sort of thing. And at this stage, it always leads to yes, it is. So that question has been asked to me: why don't you just demolish it and not do anything with it rather than pay the money? But as we all know, we are in need of housing, so that would not look good for council not to do that. But it also does serve the purpose at the moment. But it does put some stress on the fund. We pay about $2 million last year in insurance. We have just found out that that's hopefully come down this year, so that's a good news story for us. But yeah, $2 million. Can't let our secrets away. Thanks for that. We'll report that in the next 6 months.
PX item will be tomorrow.
We can't talk about that. OCHT, as they have already said, do a fantastic job of working within the very tight maintenance budget that we give them, and they have done a power of work in the upgrades and both planned and unplanned maintenance. I'd just like to say I was very privileged last week to go out on a site visit to St John's Courts, where they have done a whole complex upgrade there of installing the double glazed windows, and I was fortunate enough to chat with a tenant, and he was over the moon, and he has a carer as well that comes in regularly, and he mentioned that his carer has also mentioned just about the warmth now and the difference in the property and the difference that it is making, because he had considerable health issues, and it is helping him and making a big difference in that space. So yeah, that St John's, sorry, is a really good project, Kate. So I don't think I told you that I've got it there. So well done. Same slides that Kate had, so we won't talk too much about that. Kate had mentioned that a lot more family homes coming in, even though we do have a strong demand still in Christchurch for the 1 and 2 bedroom. And I think this stat here, and it sort of goes from oldest to youngest as opposed to youngest to oldest, but the 0 to 15 age bracket has really jumped up in the number of tenant age bracket. So I think that shows really good change in the demographic and stuff, and the family units that we are putting in there. Anything that you don't know if you've got anything else to mention on that occasion. Tenant satisfaction already been mentioned. Last slide, as Kate also mentioned, because some of you asked, is like, do we meet with other community groups? Yes, we do. Council are also involved in those meetings. So that's the Tiwai Punamu Community Housing Network, and we meet quarterly. And so I sit on that as well as a representative from council. We have a couple of us that go along to that. This is just the last meeting that we had. This is just a brief kind of overview without mentioning any particular people that spoke, just to keep it pretty broad. But one of the key things that came up for Christchurch is our lack of transitional housing that we have here, and that is quite, so we're not having that go between by the time they get to OCHT. We do, just so that you know, we do have some provision in that traditional transitional housing, and that's with the YWCA. So that's where council are currently supporting that. We have 9 units there, which equates to 16 bedrooms, and that is for women and children, and that's in our Hereford Street. Another report, we are wanting to do some more work there in future, because that is coming to its end of life, and we would like to do some more in that space. But it has been recognised amongst the sector that transitional housing is a space where we are lacking here in Christchurch, predominantly due to the earthquakes, because we lost so many of our larger.
Explain what transitional housing is.
Sorry. So transitional housing is when so emergency housing is short term, where you go, usually up to a week, a couple of weeks. They kind of aim is to put them into there. Then moving into transitional, which is slightly longer. It's normally up. The plan is it for be up to 12 weeks in transitional housing while we get the support and work through the system to get into permanent housing with the likes of OCHT and other providers. Sorry. So yeah, I just made the assumption that everybody knew that. Sorry. So yeah, it's like 12 weeks, but what we're discovering is the 12 weeks is extending to quite a long period of time here in Christchurch because we just get that lack of housing. So. And that's probably about me. Yeah, so I'm happy for questions. Kate, sorry, unless you've got anything else you want to say. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we've got Celeste.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could just talk a bit more about the transitional housing space, and given that there has been such a substantial drop in transitional housing, and of course we've got issues with emergency housing and the fact that people are being the eligibility criteria has shifted. So we've got this big gap in the housing continuum, be diplomatic, so that people aren't just getting into housing. So that kind of bottom tier is not being addressed really. What is the kind of, I know there's some work happening, but what does that look like with more specifics, and when will we hear more about that, do you think? Given that the need is kind of happening.
We're hoping to come back with some advice.
So that'll be
to meet that resolution.
Yeah.
Either before the election or straight after the election, we've got some advice ready, almost ready at the moment.
Okay, great. So we'll get a bit more detail.
Yeah. And we know from a sector, so from the conversations within the sector, is that unfortunately, we don't like pointing finger at central government, but there is some changes and stuff in that place and in that situation. And what some of the providers were saying is that where they've had transitional housing, where a private owner has rented a property and they've provided that to a community housing provider for transitional housing, then the private owner has pulled out of that because they've decided to sell their property or whatever. The new contract for another transitional house isn't being signed up and accepted, so that's meaning that the numbers are less, and that's a government. Don't ask me the reason why. Often it's because it could, but they've said it could be because it's not the same number of bedrooms. It could be a different location. It's not a like for like. So that's what we're hearing from the sector.
Sorry, one more. With the housing developments that have stalled, I know that. So I read in here that was saying that we're looking at keeping things sort of cost neutral in terms of rates, but of course we can always make the choice to, like we did with other projects like the stadium,
Next report,
fund them. So there will be an option for us to go, look, we actually think, like other councils across the country, this should be something that we do invest in, bearing in mind that we have mechanisms we can borrow pretty cheaply. So
as indicated, there's advice being prepared and we'll come back to you.
Yeah, so that would be a good one to hear back about.
Right, we've still got 5 people. Yanni, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the information. I think we look forward to the time when we can make decisions as the council too, based on the data. So I just had 2 questions. One is, I've previously put in a request to understand what's happening in terms of tenants feeling safe in the social housing. So have we had any response? There was a pretty horrific thing at Innis courts, and I asked if we had any info on trends. So I'm just wondering how we check in to see how people are feeling. I know Kangaroara's had a big issue with some of this types of problems, but in all the tenant satisfaction.
So I can probably answer that for you, Yanni, rather than Lisa.
Cool.
But we have a really rigorous model. So if most of our people live really well in their homes, and I would say 80%, 90% live so well in their homes, sometimes people need greater support, and we offer that support. And that support is often very intensive. So at the moment, I know that the team are working with 30 or 40 people who need more intensive wraparound and support and guidance to the services that can help them. So we're being as proactive as we can in identifying tenant need. From time to time, we won't know everything that's happening in our complexes, but when we do find out, we get right in. Our key focus is support.
Okay. So just
Thank you.
in terms of the
Please, Jan.
Yeah.
Running out of time.
the social, have we done any work around the social impact of intensification? Because the irony that we've got the data now that shows, you know, highest waiting list homelessness and for loss of transitional housing, at the same time that we've got the greatest capacity out of any metro for housing development and house prices going up, seems kind of contrary to all the planning we've been doing to try and get more affordable housing.
For the
So-
policy team, because that's that housing intensification and social housing.
So yeah, because there was comment made around the loss of the old bed sets, for example, in the city. So I'm just wondering who's looking at that in terms of a planning mechanism to actually get some sort of response.
Moment, but that would help council better.
We did ask as part of PC14, and then the decision that was made was pretty scathing of that. So we're making some decisions on PC14 shortly. Yes.
To see if it's there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sarah, please.
Thanks so much. Just wondering on, I can't tell what slide it is, slide 5. We've got the number of homes, sort of just over 10,000 now, which is great. So some of that's Port of Canterbury. In the past, so some time ago, or maybe consumers, we had a graph that showed the projected growth in social housing versus the projected need. And if we could, maybe the next report that comes up, actually look at how that's tracking over time, and so that we get an idea of how that's tracking for overall stuff there. The other one is, and I've had someone else just mention to me yesterday, you know, with the loss of those bed sits and bits and pieces, the potential for the use of Foley towels, which is up for.
So I've got the answers to that, but I just haven't.
Oh yeah,
Nominated it, will come to you.
Yeah, someone else mentioned it yesterday when I was at an event. So yeah, cool, thanks.
Cal?
Thanks, Lisa. Really interested in transitional housing in terms of where can I find information on transitional housing, whether it's in clusters, how it actually operates.
Where it is currently in the city.
We can provide.
We can provide that as
Sure.
as a separate thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we may not have everything you want, but at least we can provide an overview.
Tyler, yes.
G'day guys. Just a couple of things. Huge fan of the work you do, as you know. The first question is probably going to be about PX. So we're going to talk about the insurance risk tomorrow. Is that why?
You have a report and finance performance about our insurance renewal in PX.
Okay, which includes this portfolio.
That's one of the
Gotcha.
areas.
Sorry, I haven't read the PX one yet. The next one was, how does the new local government act that's being reformed affect the way that we approach housing going forward?
We would need to do that analysis as the bill goes through. But I would note the minister in a public announcement over the weekend, the media report said some of that sits with councils to make their own decisions. So we'll need to analyse those comments as well.
Okay, and the last one is predominantly around OCHT, and I know you're full to the brim with a lot of reactionary work from residents and tenants. I do notice that the City Mission outreach coordinators are doing a phenomenal job in this space. And I know that you're bound by the Act in terms of being a good tenant and a good landlord. I'm wondering, what could council do a bit more in terms of that reactionary space? Because I get quite a few from residents around my area asking about conflicts. There's a lot of conflicts in terms of antisocial behaviour, things of the sort. Could council assist more in terms of that space for the more supporting roles to help OCHT be able to fulfil that, seeing as you are bound by the Act?
I think the really helpful thing you can do, councillor, is just let us know.
Yeah.
If you're hearing anything from any of your constituents, let us know, because we'll always follow up. And quite often, most times it's easily resolved. Sometimes we need to bring in neighbours and just work through that. I think in terms of resource, we're well set to do that. We've got a great team who are really skilled at going and resolving most of those issues. But they bubble up, don't they, from time to time, and often don't find a trend. It's just a unique event that happens and then it settles again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Timothy.
Seems that the hardest to house are on the street are those suffering mental illness and substance abuse from those, and they're taken advantage of by gang members and individuals for stealing medication, etc. So it's overseas, they've got like it's a half a dozen bed sits with another dwelling who someone lives in, and it's fenced off to keep them from their so-called friends. Is anybody in the organisation, I don't expect the answer now, but if we could look at that, because I've just been helping out a couple of guys over years, and they will always revert back to their friends who are not friends at all, but they're looking for normality in their own sense. I'm just wondering about that, because you could not put them in a housing complex or whatever, and they're not a family. So
I point to the Housing First program, which is very strong in Christchurch. Looks after houses around 200 people, I think, and we ourselves house 76 people who are going through that program. So what that program does, we will be the landlord, but it's intensive wraparound support to help people live well. Christchurch has identified that we need to build exactly something that, as you're talking about, where there's an on-site supervisor who's there to support the kaiwa as they get used to sort of normalising living in homes again. So it was actually in the pipeline for Christchurch. It's just stalled at the moment as we wait on changes on policy.
if they're not looked after, because one of them they've been visited, the neighbour had plugged their extension cord from their place into his home and was taking all the power to run their home, and it couldn't be visited by a single female. It's just,
That's
one thing to another, and so they do need separate living and support. So
We have a decision tomorrow property, which is the model of, in this case, it's not people with mental health issues, but youth with a supervisor on site. So that's the proposal that you're considering tomorrow for the Gilbert property. So we certainly see merit in that model, even if it's for different sectors of market is the wrong word, but essentially the
Okay, good.